Okay, good morning, dear neighbors. I'm Jeffrey Carroll, Assistant Professor of Political Science and Chair of the Center for Data and Society. I have the privilege to introduce the Honorable Joe Sestak, the first speaker for the college's Campaign 2020 From the Hill to the House Speaker Series, a chance to interact with those that aspire to hold the highest office in American government, perhaps the most visible office in the world. And Joe Sestak has served in many tough jobs, and he seeks another. He is a three-star admiral and former congressman for Pennsylvania's 7th Congressional District. He served 2 terms in Congress from 2007 to 2011, and at the time of his election, Sestak was the highest-ranking military official to serve in Congress. He spent 31 years in the U.S. Navy, and his decorations include the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, Defense Superior Service Medal, 2 Legion of Merit Awards, 2 Meritorious Service Medals, Joint Service Commendation Medal, 3 Navy Commendation Medals, and the Navy Achievement Medal. He also served as the Director of Defense Policy on the National Security Council staff under President Clinton, and served as Hillary Clinton's 2008 campaign National Security Advisor, specializing in Veterans Affairs. Most recently, Congressman Sestak has served as the first president of First Global, a nonprofit which promotes STEM education in developing countries. He's a native of Delaware County, husband to Susan L. Clark Sestak, and father to Alexandra Sestak. He announced his candidacy for president on June 22nd, 2019. He will be speaking to us today about an important theme, a theme we all want from a president, and that theme is accountability. So please give him a very warm Griffin welcome, the Honorable Joe Sestak.
Thanks very much. And Sister, I'm very pleased to be back. I had St. Joe nuns in St. Francis of Assisi. Remember old Sister Urbana and Sister St. Cyr, and my hands still sting a little. But I had a great education, and they were wonderful. To the youth, thank you very much for having me, more than you know. Come aboard an aircraft carrier. The average age of the 5,000 sailors on an aircraft carrier is 19 and a half. They run a nuclear reactor. They fix the pilot's plane before he or she gets in. And you don't even ask a question. You just salute them. The young man or woman salutes you back, and off you go into the night. If anybody doesn't think the youth of America isn't great, come aboard. I love youth. I lived with them. I worked with them. I went to war with them. And why I most love them is they're not burdened with experience. They actually are willing to look at things, which is absolutely necessary today, a little bit different. When I graduated down the road from Cardinal O'Hara, I'm an O'Hara boy, and went off. I had 31 wonderful years wearing the cloth of our nation in the United States Navy, in war and in peace. I was on the ground when that war, which many of you weren't even born perhaps when it began, Afghanistan, began. For a brief period, because I headed the Navy Strategic Anti-Terrorism Unit. I came out, commanded an aircraft carrier battle group with about 15,000 sailors, including those 5,000 on the carrier, for the strikes against Taliban and Al-Qaeda. In peace, because you come ashore every 2 or 3 years from sea, they sent me off to Harvard University to get a doctorate in economics and in national security, because they wanted to put us in certain places to be of utility to this nation when ashore. So eventually I got to work, as was pointed out, for President Clinton in the White House as his director for defense policy. But when I came home from the war, I stood in a military hospital holding the hand of my wife. I got married very late in life, 47. Couldn't convince anyone. But our then 4-year-old daughter was wheeled out, and the doctors took us aside and said we could not get the brain cancer. when we asked what that meant, they said, it looks like glioblastoma. And we said, what's that mean? Said she has about 90 days. Our world changed. But because of the health care plan that your parents gave us in the military, that young warrior beat that demon. 8% chance. No adults ever lived. Only 8% of children have. I had to pay back my country. The one I had served for 30-some years had doubled down on me and my daughter and my wife. So I left being an independent in the Navy, because that's what I think military should be. They should be nonpartisan. And I came home to Delaware County, where I'd kept my vote all those years, because I love PA. And I became a Democrat in a nearly 2-to-1 Republican district. Actually, I didn't even think I knew it was 2-to-1 at the time. And I ran on one thing. I'm a retired Navy admiral, and I'm running on national security that begins at home, in health security. I became the second Democrat since the Civil War. They thought it was a species that didn't exist there anymore. And then I got reelected after 2 years by 20 points. I had an F from the National Rifle Association. I had 100% from the national rating from the National Organization of Women, a 95% from the Human Rights Campaign, 100% from NARAL. But I got elected by 20 points, reelected, and I didn't spend a penny of the $3 million I raised on one single campaign ad. Somehow the Republicans and I had somehow know where we could agree, but we learned to disagree well. And then over time, I ran for the Senate. In one of the races, I walked across this country, this state. It seemed like a country I was walking across. 422 miles. The recession had happened, that great recession that destroyed over 4,000 constituents walked in our office. Excuse me, more than that. We handled 4 times the constituency cases of the average congressional office. It was like a war. We kept the office open 7 days a week to 9 o'clock every night. And then I decided, as I ran for the Senate, I should go out and let the people I met that I knew them. I had 2 calls when I was walking across the state. One was from a Republican, because I had my flight jacket on. And as I walked past his car dealership in a small town, he called out to me, "Hey, Admiral, I'm a Republican, but I love what you're doing." And I had a town hall every day. Then I got a call from the senior Democratic senator down in Washington, D.C., that raises the money for candidates to use to win. And he said, "Joe, just get back home, sit in a room, and raise funds. Don't walk out there." But I kept walking. It came at a cost. And that's what I wanted to talk about in the last remaining minutes that I have before the great questions, where I'll learn from you. So come back aboard that aircraft carrier, because saying no cost me. As my party, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, put more millions of dollars in to defeat me, a Democrat, than they put in against the Republican Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. Independence was not valued in my party's leadership. So come back aboard that aircraft carrier with me. There's those 5,000 sailors, and when a pilot gets in a plane, they turn on their engines and put their feet on the brakes, and then they strap you into a catapult. And it's 0200 in the morning, and it's just like a rodeo. That horse is bucking, and that plane is riding hard, and they push a button, and they whip you into the air. Hershey Park has no ride that's better than that. But sometimes, once in a blue moon, someone will call out, the air boss, and say, "Stop. Get out of the plane quickly. There's been an ambush in Afghanistan, and we need you to get out so we can have a different type of combat aircraft there." But no pilot turns off their engine until they know that they've been unhooked from that catapult underneath them. Because if they are still connected by that steel rod, and you turn off your engine and someone makes a mistake, and they push that button, you go off for a great, but it's the final ride of your life. So a young man or woman, 19 and a half years old, comes out on that carrier deck. Could be from Pennsylvania, could be from Iowa, where I just flew in this morning. Could be from a red state, could be from a blue state, could be a Muslim, could be an Hispanic, could be white. We just don't care. We just know they're going to do it right. As they go into the belly of the plane and they unhook it from the catapult, and then that young man or woman walks not to the side of the plane. They walk in front of the plane, and they give a very simple signal like this. And then that youth doesn't move. And the pilot looks down and gives a nod of their head. And then he or she shuts off their engines, opens up the canopy, and gets safely on deck. And that youth has said everything that America most wants, most yearns for, most needs today. Pilot, you can trust me, not for my word, but for my actual deed. Because if I made a mistake and you shut off your engines and suddenly you start heading overboard to your death, you're going to go right through me, and I'm going to go overboard with you to my own. When I arrived in that aircraft carrier battle group, I was told to take a left turn into the Persian Gulf after striking Afghanistan to begin the precursor strikes against Iraq. That is a war Democrats and Republicans voted for. They didn't know the difference between a Sunni and a Shia. They unleashed 2 decades of unaccountable consequences. That invasion helped create ISIS as it metastasized throughout Syria and the Middle East and beyond, and even copycat killings in Los Angeles. And then those same Democrats and Republicans over time and across the spectrum removed the one place in America a wall is definitely needed to keep greed out and accountability in. And they tore that wall down, and the inaptly named Wall Street was left unfettered to destroy my constituency's livelihoods in the Great Recession. And not one politician who voted for the carnage of that war or for the carnage from that Great Recession of people's livelihoods has ever accounted for themselves for the damage that they did. And yet 450 have taken a lobbying job during that period of time. I know, I got offered those same jobs, 6 and 7 figures, as my wife put her hand on my shoulder and said, as I turned them down, "Are you sure?" I think she was joking. This nation, I believe, needs someone to replace Mr. Trump. But that's not sufficient. This nation needs someone that the people will trust once again because they believe he will be accountable to them, to people, above party, above self, above any special interest, no matter the cost. There's no other way without a united America this country could ever begin to meet the defining challenges of our time. How else will you ever get through the absolute requirements for climate change, the greatest catastrophic threat to humanity that even the Pentagon has said is an immediate national security danger to us? How do you get through a Republican Senate when all we've been able to do now in 2 administrations, by and large, is just have executive orders and the next guy rips them out without restoring the greatest deficit we have in America today? Not the debt, it's the trust deficit. How do we stop the drilling offshore or in the Arctic? How do we move the fossil fuel subsidies away from the oil companies and move them over to green energy? I was the one guy across Pennsylvania who was for a moratorium since 2010 on fracking here in Pennsylvania, and yet my Republican district reelected. How do you ever in healthcare, as some of you are studying, ever fix this Affordable Care Act and take that public option that I voted for and the Senate didn't have the guts to stand up to the health security industry, health insurance industry, and they pulled it out to move us in a thoughtful way, because not just immediately, but in a thoughtful way, because in the military you learn piss poor planning gives piss poor execution, that we move towards single payer. Because when my daughter's cancer came back last year, which is the reason I was late getting into this race, and she got in a safe shelter last June, I had no intention of getting in, but I sat with her, turned down a job to hold her hand as she went through that burning radiation at Mass General again, after a surgeon came out who had retired in Bucks County to do the surgery for her again. And all I could think about is, how could they stick me with a $300,000 bill because the one drug she needed to save her life got denied by a health insurance industry company? How do we ever fix student loans? And I hope we bring that up. But how about those plumbers, those electricians? How about those machinist mates? 65% of Americans don't have a college degree. And as I walked across the state, I met them. The coal miner that lost his job because natural gas came in. We spend less than any developed nation in the world on labor force training, 0.001% of GDP. Can we fix student loans without just forgiving them all? In a heartbeat, as I hope we'll discuss. But if you really want to do something for this nation, for the Trump supporter and the Clinton supporter, how about taking care, as I was out in Iowa and I met someone called a precision agronomist. I said, what's that? Well, I'm making sure those cornfields are very well GPSed because we're going to have wireless tractors. What happens to those drivers? There's 12 million Americans today who are not in the labor participation statistics because they lost their jobs and they don't have the money to learn a new skill. Where's the training and retraining for them? That's what my Democratic Party should be focused on, primarily. They're the engine of this nation. And then finally, as we talk, I arrived in that Arabian Sea, and waiting there for us, for my 10 ships in a battle group, was an international armada. 20 international ships were there. This was just after 9/11 had happened. Japan was there that had not been outside the Sea of Japan since the end of the Second World War. Germany was alongside them. Ships had been sent by their nations across the Atlantic like Canada. Some came across the Pacific like Australia. And the Italian Minister of Defense said why they all had come. Some may think, he said in a message, that we Italians are better lovers than warriors. He actually said that. But America has been attacked, and we will be there for them. We have the world with us against evil. Because there in that distant sea was the realization that America after World War II had created the flame of justice in a global concord. It had brought together nations and organizations that had the same democratic values we did and create a rules-based world order based upon individual and human rights, open and fair markets, fair and just governments, and one that believed in the world's collective good. And it was under America's brightness of that flame of justice that it elected presidents from John F. Kennedy to Ronald Reagan that understood it was our leadership of this world that not only protected our American dream, but it brought extreme poverty from the end of World War II from 63% of the world's population to 8% today. It took literacy rate from 40% of the world up to 85% of the world. And it had people living now, not normally across the world on average, about 36 or 38 years, but all the way up to 70. Because we maintained an uneasy but a great peace, so prosperity might ensue. I am running, not for my party. I am running, not for any special interest. I am running because this nation of ours, Americans need someone, all Americans, who they believe they can trust to be accountable to them, above party, above self, above any special interest, no matter the cost, so that we can unite this country, convene the world, because there's no other way we'll meet the defining challenges of our time. Take climate change. Even if we pass the Green New Deal here at home, it won't matter. 85% of that damage comes from abroad. The tropics has 8% of air conditioning today. By 2050, 50% of the developed nations that don't have air conditioning will have air conditioning. That will be equivalent to deforesting 2/3 of the Amazon, unless they get the most efficient standards of air conditioning. I will stop and take your questions, but I'll always remember the words of John McCain, that senator who died of the same disease that hit my daughter. He used to call me during my Senate races. And one time he said, "Hey, Joe, I saw you on television. You're still too long. Keep it shorter." So I'm sorry if I went on a bit long. May I have your questions, please? Thank you.